I never imagined that the hardest decision of my life would come disguised as love and loyalty. What I'm about to share isn't easy, but it's the truth. If you believe family should always come first, this story may challenge everything you think you know. And before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more real emotional stories, and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. Now, let me tell you how my own husband asked me to prove my worth to his family. My husband looked at me with a seriousness I had never seen before, and said I needed to give my kidney to his mother. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. He spoke as if this were the most natural request in the world. He said it would show my loyalty, that it would finally make me a true part of their family. I remember nodding, even though my chest felt tight and my hands were shaking under the table. I had always been alone. I lost my parents when I was 9 years old in a highway accident that ended everything I knew in a single moment. After that, my life became a series of temporary places and unfamiliar faces. Foster homes, shared rooms, and quiet nights where no one asked how my day had been. By the time I became an adult, I had learned one thing very well. If someone offered you belonging, you didn't ask questions. You held on. That's why I married Julian. He was confident, well-spoken, and came from a family that looked perfect from the outside. A large home, expensive furniture, polite smiles that never quite reached their eyes. His mother, Beatrice, made it clear from the beginning that I was not the woman she would have chosen for her son. Still, I tried. I cooked. I cleaned. I stayed quiet. I told myself love meant endurance. When Beatrice became ill, everything shifted. Hospital visits replaced dinner conversations. Doctors used words that sounded final. Chronic kidney failure. Limited time. Julian suddenly became attentive in a way he never had before. He brought me coffee. He held my hand. He spoke about family, about sacrifice, about how much this meant to him. He told me I was a perfect match. He said he had already checked. When I asked why he couldn't donate, he showed me paperwork saying he was medically incompatible. I didn't question it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was my moment to finally be chosen, not tolerated. The hospital paperwork was thick and confusing. I signed where they told me to sign. I didn't notice the clause that said the organ could be reassigned if the recipient became unfit. I trusted my husband. I trusted his family. That trust would cost me more than I could have imagined. At the time, I thought agreeing to the surgery would finally secure my place in their lives. I had no idea that while I was preparing to give away a part of my body, they were preparing to erase me completely. And what happened the day I woke up from surgery changed everything. The day of the surgery arrived faster than I expected. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and something metallic that made my stomach turn. Julian kissed my forehead and told me everything would be fine. He said he would be right there when I woke up. I remember the operating room lights blurring above me, and thinking that this was the moment my life would finally change for the better. When I opened my eyes, the pain came first. A deep aching pressure that made it hard to breathe. Tubes were attached to my body, and every small movement felt like fire. I searched the room for Julian, expecting to see him sitting beside me, holding my hand. He wasn't there. I told myself he must have stepped out. Minutes passed. Then hours. I wasn't in the private room he had promised. Instead, I was in a shared ward, separated from another patient by a thin curtain. Nurses moved quickly, avoiding long conversations. Each time footsteps approached, my heart lifted, hoping it was him. Each time I was wrong. By the second day, the silence felt intentional. I asked a nurse if my husband had visited. She hesitated before saying she wasn't sure. That hesitation stayed with me. On the third day, my phone was gone. I assumed it had been taken for safekeeping, but no one could tell me where it was. I tried to focus on healing, but something felt off. The doctors spoke carefully, choosing their words as if I were fragile glass. One mentioned that plans had changed suddenly. Another said paperwork was still being reviewed. No one explained what that meant. On the fourth day, the door finally opened. I felt relief rush through me, followed by confusion. Julian walked in, perfectly dressed, calm, untouched by exhaustion. Behind him was his mother in a wheelchair, her expression sharp and satisfied. And beside him stood a woman I had never seen before, wearing a dark red dress and holding his arm as if it belonged there. Julian didn't sit down. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He placed a thick brown envelope on my chest and told me to read it when I was ready. I didn't need to open it to know. Divorce papers. Filed days ago. While I was on the operating table. His mother smiled. The woman in red looked at me with curiosity, not guilt. That was the moment I understood something terrible. The surgery, the urgency, the sudden affection. None of it had been about love or family. It had been a transaction. As they turned to leave, I was still trying to understand how my life had collapsed so quickly. But the truth I was about to learn next would reveal that the surgery itself had not gone the way any of them expected. After they left, the room felt colder. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady beeping of machines, trying to breathe through the pain and the shock. My mind kept replaying Julian's face, calm and distant, as if I were already a memory he had put away. I wondered how long they had planned this. Weeks. Months. Maybe from the very beginning. A nurse came in to check my vitals. She spoke gently, asked about my pain level and adjusted my medication. I asked her if the transplant had been completed successfully. She paused before answering. That pause told me everything was not as simple as I had been led to believe. She told me the attending physician would come speak with me soon. Her tone was careful, almost protective. When she left, my heart began to race. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Fear settled deep in my chest, heavier than the physical pain. An hour later, a doctor I didn't recognize entered the room with a clipboard in his hands. He pulled a chair close to my bed and explained that there had been a last-minute medical issue. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, had become unfit to receive the transplant just before surgery. Her condition had worsened unexpectedly. I asked him what that meant for me. My voice sounded small even to my own ears. He explained that my kidney had already been approved for donation, and under hospital protocol, it had been reassigned to another patient in critical condition. Someone who had no family match and no time to wait. I felt dizzy. I asked who received it. He told me the name, someone I had heard of before. A wealthy businessman known for his philanthropy. The details blurred together, but one thing was clear. My kidney had saved someone else's life. The doctor assured me all my medical expenses would be covered. He said arrangements were being made to move me to a private recovery suite. I barely heard him. All I could think about was Julian's face when he would find out. The power he thought he had over me was already slipping away. At that moment, I believed the worst was over. I had no idea that this unexpected twist would set off a chain of events that would completely reverse everything Julian thought he controlled. Later that evening, I was moved to a private room overlooking the city. The quiet there felt different, heavier, as if the walls were holding secrets. Nurses treated me with a level of attention I wasn't used to, explaining every medication, checking on me often. Someone brought my phone back, fully charged, placed carefully on the bedside table as if it mattered again. Messages began to appear. Missed calls from unknown numbers. Voicemails I didn't open. I already knew who they were from. Julian. Panic always reveals itself eventually, and I could almost hear it in the silence between each notification. The next morning, 2 people entered my room dressed in dark, tailored suits. They introduced themselves calmly and explained they represented the man who had received my kidney. They thanked me in a way that felt sincere, not rehearsed. They told me he was recovering well and that he wanted to ensure I was protected. That word stayed with me. Protected. No one had ever used it in reference to me before. They explained that while reviewing the donation documents, their legal team had uncovered irregularities connected to my marriage. Assets transferred without my knowledge. Accounts opened in my name. Decisions made by my husband that now carried consequences. They asked if Julian had ever explained any of it to me. I shook my head. Speaking felt too dangerous, as if saying the truth out loud would make it real. One of them nodded as if he already knew. That afternoon, Julian finally showed up again. This time he looked different. His confidence was cracked, his smile forced. He tried to apologize, said everything had been misunderstood, that his mother had pressured him. I listened without responding. When I told him I knew the transplant hadn't gone to her, his face went pale. He left quickly after that. Too quickly. I watched him go, realizing for the first time that I was no longer afraid of him. I thought that was the end of our story, But what I didn't yet understand was that the legal truth behind my marriage was about to turn Julian's entire world upside down. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. My body healed slowly, yet my mind stayed awake, sorting through memories that now felt altered. Every conversation with Julian replayed itself differently. Every promise sounded hollow. I realized how carefully he had shaped my reality, how easily I had stepped into a role he needed me to play. One afternoon, a legal folder was placed on my bedside table. Inside were documents I had never seen before. Property deeds, bank accounts, insurance policies, all bearing my name. The representatives explained that over the course of our marriage, Julian had transferred assets to me for tax purposes, assuming he could reclaim them later. By filing for divorce the way he did, he had unknowingly locked those assets in my control. I felt sick hearing it. Not from guilt but from clarity. I hadn't been a wife. I had been a strategy. They asked me what I wanted to do next. No one had ever asked me that question without attaching expectations to it. I told them I wanted the truth documented and my safety guaranteed. They assured me both were already in motion. Julian stopped calling after that. Instead, messages came from his associates, then from his mother's care team, then finally from a lawyer who sounded exhausted before the conversation even began. I didn't answer any of them. Silence had become my boundary. As my discharge date approached, I stood by the window of my room, watching traffic move steadily below. Life was continuing, unaware that mine had quietly shifted direction. I wasn't angry. I wasn't celebrating. I was simply awake in a way I had never been before. I believed I was finally free. But freedom, I would soon learn, has a way of exposing truths that can no longer be hidden, and Julian's reckoning was closer than I realized. I was discharged on a clear morning, the kind that feels symbolic even when you don't want it to. A driver waited downstairs, arranged by the same representatives who had quietly taken over my protection. As the car pulled away from the hospital, I realized I wasn't going home. I no longer knew where home was. The apartment they arranged was simple, quiet, and secure. No photos on the walls. No memories attached to the furniture. For the first time in years, every decision inside that space belonged to me. I slept more deeply than I had in a long time, not because I felt safe, but because I felt unseen. A week later, I was asked to review official statements. Investigators had begun looking into Julian's financial activity, the transfers, the falsified medical records, the pressure placed on hospital staff. What I thought was a personal betrayal was unfolding into something much larger. I learned that Beatrice's condition had been exaggerated, dialysis schedules manipulated, timelines pushed forward to create urgency. Julian hadn't just lied to me. He had built an entire narrative designed to corner me into agreement. The realization didn't break me. It steadied me. I gave my statement calmly, fact by fact, without emotion. That surprised everyone, including me. When you survive something this calculated, emotion becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. That night, I received one final message from Julian. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. He said I didn't understand what I had involved myself in. I deleted it without replying. What Julian didn't realize was that the investigation he feared was already moving faster than he could escape, and the next time I would see him, it wouldn't be on his terms. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Meetings with attorneys, auditors, and investigators consumed my days. Every document I signed, every phone call I returned was a step toward reclaiming control. Harrison Sterling watched quietly, offering guidance only when necessary, letting me make decisions that built confidence instead of dependency. I began reviewing Julian's assets. There were warehouses filled with unsold textiles, accounts with unexplained withdrawals, luxury vehicles, and properties all mismanaged under his arrogance. Each discovery felt like uncovering a secret he assumed I would never find. I cataloged everything meticulously. Every misstep, every debt, every contract that could be leveraged against him. Then came the meeting with Thomas Reed. He laid out a plan that was as precise as it was ruthless. Phoenix Investments would quietly acquire Julian's companies, using shell corporations and layered contracts to protect my identity. It was surgical, strategic, and irreversible. I felt a thrill I hadn't known since childhood. The thrill of power balanced with purpose. But Harrison warned me. Do not let revenge consume you, Ammani. This is not about payback. This is about justice. Focus on control, on building, not breaking. If you lose sight, you will become what you despise. I nodded, though inside a small flame of anger burned brighter than ever. Control and justice would be my currency. The first domino fell when a representative from one of Julian's major suppliers called, desperate for payment. I let them stew for a week before arranging a meeting. Sitting across the table, I saw the surprise in their eyes. A young woman, previously invisible, now dictating the terms. I made no threats, no promises. Just facts, leverage, and authority. They understood immediately that the rules had changed. Julian thought he had destroyed me, but every step I took was tightening the noose around his empire, and he had no idea how close he was to falling. The invitation arrived quietly, a gold-embossed envelope that hinted at opportunity but hid a trap. A black-tie gala for potential investors, promising partnerships and profit. Julian's eyes lit up with greed the moment he saw it, never questioning the source, never imagining the game that had already begun. I prepared for the evening with the same precision I had applied to every lesson Harrison had taught me. Emerald green silk gown, perfectly tailored, diamond necklace catching the light with each movement. My hair was sleek, makeup flawless, posture commanding. The woman who had been used and discarded was gone. In her place stood Ammani Sterling, poised, confident, untouchable. Inside the restaurant, the chandeliers glittered like stars above the sea of Atlanta's elite. Julian moved through the crowd with practiced charm, eager to impress, blind to the fact that I was watching, calculating every word, every gesture. He believed he was chasing opportunity, but the opportunity was mine to control. Harrison stepped onto the small stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying authority and warmth, "allow me to introduce the new CEO of Phoenix Investments, my associate, Ammani Sterling." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Julian froze, his jaw tightening, realizing too late that he had walked into my arena. I descended the stairs, emerald gown shimmering, every eye on me. I spoke with clarity and confidence about strategic investments, fiscal responsibility, and growth opportunities. I was not just presenting a plan, I was commanding respect. Every word reinforced the new reality. I was no longer vulnerable, no longer invisible, and Julian's world of manipulation and deceit would crumble beneath my calculated steps. Julian smiled politely, thinking he was still the player, but tonight, he would learn that the girl he tried to use had become the master of the game, and the stakes were higher than he could ever imagine. Julian lingered near the bar, nursing a cocktail, scanning the crowd for allies who didn't exist. His mind raced with calculations, imagining deals, imagining profit, oblivious to the fact that every move he made was under my careful observation. Every handshake he offered, every compliment he gave, I catalogued, storing each detail for the moment it would matter most. The room was a sea of glittering gowns and polished shoes, the air thick with ambition and the subtle scent of expensive perfume. I walked among them with confidence, nodding politely, listening intently, asking questions that revealed insight beyond anyone's expectation. I was no longer the quiet, obedient wife who had signed papers and offered her kidney. I was a force, a strategist, a woman reborn from betrayal. Harrison stood at the edge of the room, observing, a subtle nod confirming that everything was going according to plan. His presence lent weight to my every word, every gesture. I felt a thrill of satisfaction knowing that Julian's arrogance had led him straight into a trap he didn't even realize existed. He had underestimated me, underestimated the lessons I had learned, underestimated the power of someone who had nothing left to lose. When the speeches concluded, Julian approached, offering congratulations in a tone that tried to mask both envy and desperation. I smiled politely, letting the mask of civility hide the fire that burned beneath. "Thank you, Julian," I said, voice calm, eyes steady. "It's been quite an evening." His smirk faltered as he sensed the shift in power, a tremor he could not hide. He thought he was still in control, but the real game had only just begun, and every step he took would lead him closer to a fate he never imagined. The night of the black tie gala arrived. Julian stood in the center of the room, adjusting his cufflinks, eyes scanning for potential investors, completely unaware that the very event meant to elevate him would instead mark the pinnacle of his downfall. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished floors, Diamond necklaces sparkled on every neck, and the hum of conversation carried the scent of ambition and greed. Every detail had been carefully orchestrated to feed his ego, while setting the stage for his exposure. I arrived shortly after, descending the staircase in an emerald green silk gown. The diamond necklace Harrison had given me caught the light perfectly, a symbol not just of wealth, but of knowledge, power, and the training that had transformed me. All eyes turned, not because of my presence alone, but because the woman standing before them now commanded attention in a way Julian never could have imagined. I walked to the microphone with calm authority, projecting a confidence that made investors hang on my every word. Unaware that the man who had thought to control me now listened from the other side of the room, powerless. When I finally introduced myself as the new CEO of Phoenix Investments, the gasps around the room barely registered compared to the look on Julian's face. Shock, disbelief, and a creeping panic. He realized too late that the golden opportunity he had thought was his was already a cage, built meticulously by me and Harrison Sterling. Every handshake, every nod, every strategic move he had made led him here, completely under my command. By the end of the evening, Julian would understand that the empire he thought he controlled was never his, and that the woman he had discarded was now the one holding all the power. I stood on the rooftop garden, the cool wind brushing against my face, the city lights of Atlanta stretching endlessly below. Julian's empire had crumbled without him even realizing it. The Phoenix Investments account had quietly absorbed every flaw of his business, every gap he thought he could exploit, and now it was all under my control. I remembered Sienna's smug smile, Beatrice's sneer, Julian's cold eyes, all burned into my memory. But the power I held now wasn't for revenge alone. It was a shield, a lesson, and a chance to build something real for myself. Harrison Sterling stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. You've done more than survive, Ammani. You've transformed every betrayal into strength. I looked down at the city and felt a weight lift from my chest. No one could touch me again, and no one could take away the life I was about to claim. But even as I breathed in the night air, I knew one thing: the lessons were far from over. There were new challenges ahead, new battles, but this time I would fight on my terms, and somewhere, far below in the shadows of his empty empire, Julian realized the truth too late that I had turned his cruelty into my power, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. What would you do if the people you trusted most used you, then tried to erase you from their lives? Would you fight back or let them win?